Yesterday in a forum post that when you're in the association of people who understand these rasa, the science of rasa, and the manifestations of rasa, then you get like a contact high. You can feel rasa yourself, even if you're not very qualified, simply by being in the association of people who are feeling this rasa, immersed in this ocean or this current of liquid nectar, the nectar of immortality. You can feel it too. Of course, as soon as you go away, then you won't feel it anymore. That's why we have all of our courses and all of our presentations on different aspects of devotional service, so that you can learn how to make this rasa, this amrita, this nectar of immortality. Once you taste this, you won't have any more taste for anything else. No one, while remaining on the material platform, should discuss these different descriptions of bhava and anubhava by quoting different statements of transcendental literatures. Such manifestations are displays of the transcendental pleasure potency of the Lord. One should simply try to understand that on the spiritual platform there are many varieties of reciprocal love. Such loving exchanges should never be considered to be material. In the Mahabharata, Udyama Parva, it is warned that things which are inconceivable should not be subjected to arguments. You would think this is common sense, huh? If I have never been to the spiritual world, if I have never seen the personal form of the Lord, if I have never felt these exalted sentiments called bhava, if I don't understand the philosophy behind it, if I don't understand the method, if I'm not following the principles, if I'm not chanting the required number of rounds every day, or if I'm chanting offenselessly, or if I'm misunderstanding the philosophy or the practices in some way, then I should not attempt to discuss these things which are beyond my consciousness, beyond my experience, beyond my awareness. I made a policy a long time ago, many, many years ago, that I would never try to teach or discuss things which are beyond my personal experience. And this policy has served me very well because it saved me from speculation. Speculation, especially on something which is beyond one's experience, is a kind of untruthfulness. It's a kind of lie. It's a kind of pretending to know about something that you actually have no knowledge of. In the Vedic context, knowledge and experience, jnana and vijnana, are very intimately linked. You cannot hold forth on some subject matter without having personal experience. Or if you do, then you're going to get it all wrong. I mean, it's so obvious. Yet we see, for example, in the material world, it was a very good example. A couple of months ago, you probably didn't hear much about it here in North America, but there was a flight from Brazil to Europe that crashed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And it got caught in some thunderstorms, and probably the autopilot failed, and the plane broke up in midair. So the news was full of speculation by people who knew nothing about flying. What caused this crash? And there was very, very misleading statements made by people with no background at all, who simply took one piece of information from one place and another from another place and put them together and made some conclusion that was completely nonsense. Because they had no knowledge or experience of the subject. So I was reading these things and I was getting more and more frustrated. Can anybody, talk sense about this thing? So I looked up and went on a forum of airline pilots. In fact, the airline pilots who happened to fly the same or very similar model of airplane that was involved in the crash. And their analysis was so much, I mean, it was so much better. It was just like, well, you know, this is a known problem and this other thing is a known problem, and they were in an environment where those two things could come together, and if they did, then they would be in trouble, and this could happen and that could happen, leading to a crash like we saw. Very clear. So the rascal news reporters are just taking a piece of information from here and there and throwing it together and coming up with a nonsense story. But the people who know, they can describe everything very, very clearly. And then you can actually reach some conclusion, which is reasonable. Okay, so the same thing is true here when we're talking about devotional service. If you have never experienced these things, when we talk about, or this quote from the scriptures about these different transcendental emotions, if you've never experienced them, you have no business talking about them, because you're going to definitely get it wrong. And then people who hear it will be misled. See, you'll mislead yourself and then you'll mislead others also. This is the problem all over the world. That people who know nothing about spiritual life, actual spiritual life, are posing as spiritual teachers. And they're giving so-called spiritual knowledge, which they have no experience of. So it's very easy, as far as material things, to determine if someone has real practical knowledge. You simply have to say, okay, do it, show me. If a person, you know, claims to be a brain surgeon, well, okay, do some brain surgery. Let's see if the patient survives, you know. But when we're talking about spiritual life, it's very difficult because we're talking about a process that takes a long time, years, decades even, lifetimes. So if the process is defective, or the implementation, or the understanding, it's going to take a long time for this to show up. It's not going to show up right away. So people who actually have no knowledge, they can get away with it easier, because it's very, very hard, especially if the audience has no experience either, to uncover their incompetence. This is the problem in spiritual life. So in spiritual life, we have to accept the authoritative statements of the Scripture. The Scripture knows. The compiler of the Scripture, Veda Vyasadeva, he is an incarnation of Krishna. He knows. He's all cognizant. He knows past, present, future. He knows every status, every possible reaction of the spiritual process in the living entity. And he can express this very nicely in poetic Sanskrit language. We cannot. Therefore, we have to, like it says here, we should not subject things which are inconceivable to our imperfect arguments. Only if we have actual knowledge, actual experience, are we qualified to talk about that. And you notice that I stay very close to the book. I stay very close to the Scripture. I don't just go off and give my own ideas or analysis on it. And sometimes I do when it's necessary to clear up a point. But actually, I prefer to stick as close as possible to the original Scripture, because Rupa Goswami really knows. He's direct disciple of Lord Chaitanya. So anyway, the transactions of the spiritual world are inconceivable to us in our present state of life. Great liberated souls like Rupa Goswami and others have tried to give us some hints of transcendental activities in the spiritual world. But on the whole, these transactions will remain inconceivable to us at the present moment. Understanding the exchanges of transcendental loving service with Krishna is possible only when one is actually in touch with the pleasure potency of the Supreme Lord. Why? Because all of these emotions and all of these states, all these pastimes are a manifestation of Srimati Radharani and her Hladini Shakti. So, unless we are in touch, unless we are actually surrendered to a bona fide spiritual master, completely, with no material engagement, no material contamination, no material attachment, and fully engaged in devotional service under his direction. That's what it means to be situated in the transcendental world, transcendental energy. In this connection,